The bell above the door of Granger's gun supply jingled softly as a stooped, gray-haired man shuffled inside. His denim jacket hung loose on his thin frame, his steps slow but steady. He looked out of place among the racks of polished hunting rifles, gleaming handguns, and tactical gear. The man paused, running a hand over the glass display case filled with pistols. His eyes lingered on a well-kept Colt 1911. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips, as if the sight carried him back decades. "Can I help you, sir?" The question came sharp and clipped, delivered by a young clerk with slicked back hair. His name tag read Kyle. He glanced at the old man as though he were a stray who had wandered in from the street. "Yes," the old man said softly, his voice rough but calm. "I'm looking for .45 ACP rounds, hollow points, if you got AM." Kyle frowned. "Those area broken bar pricey. We don't usually sell those to well, hobbyists. Maybe you'd be better off with some .22 LR, cheaper, easier to handle." The old man's brow furrowed slightly. "Son, I didn't come here to be talked down to. I need .45 ACP. Kyle smirked, tapping on the counter. "Listen, Grandpa, this isn't story time. You probably don't even know how to load a magazine. Why don't you leave the real gear to people who know what they're doing?" A couple of younger customers browsing the rifles snickered. The old man stood straighter, his pale blue eyes flashing with something hard, something that made Kyle's smile falter for a moment. "I know what I'm doing," the old man said. His voice had steel now. "I've been doing it longer than you've been alive." "Right," Kyle said with a laugh. "Let me guess, you were in the Boy Scouts back in the '60s? He raised his voice so the others could hear. "Hey, we got the war hero here." The chuckles grew louder. The old man's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he placed his weathered hands on the counter. "I served 30 years, he said evenly. "Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq. I've trained men who now train SEALs, so don't tell me I don't know what I'm doing." For a moment, silence hung in the shop, but then Kyle rolled his eyes. Sure, and I'm the president." "Look, old-timer, we don't have time for wannabes. Why don't you try Walmart down the road? They've got Nerf guns more your speed." The old man's face went cold. He turned without another word and walked to the door. As he pushed it open, Kyle called after him, "Don't trip on your cane." The laughter echoed behind him as the bell jingled once more. 1 hour later, the sound of engines broke the lazy afternoon quiet. A convoy of matte black SUVs and tan Humvees rolled down Main Street, stopping in front of Granger's gun supply. Doors opened, boots hit the pavement, and in seconds, a squad of men in fatigues and tactical gear fanned out. Their patches bore the unmistakable trident insignia of the United States Navy SEALs. Kyle, wiping down the counter, froze. His heart skipped when he saw the men approaching. Customers pressed against the walls, whispering in awe and fear. The SEALs moved with sharp precision, their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped beard, is stepping inside first. His presence filled the room instantly. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice calm but commanding. "We're looking for someone." An older gentleman, about 6 feet, gray hair, blue eyes, walks with a limp. Kyle blinked. Yeah, he was here earlier. Wanted ammo. Kind of a crazy guy, you know? Claimed he was some kind of war hero." He forced a laugh. "We kicked him out." The SEAL leader's expression hardened. His eyes, cold and sharp, locked on Kyle. "You what?" "I mean, he was a broken bar talking big. Probably some old vet making stuff up. No harm done." The SEAL stepped closer, his shadow falling over the counter. "That a crazy guy is Commander Jack Reynolds, retired, 3 decades in uniform. He trained half the men in this room, including me." The color drained from Kyle's face. The SEAL's voice dropped, each word like a hammer. "You kicked out a man who's bled for this country more times than you've drawn breath. You mocked him, laughed at him. If you knew what he's done or what he's given you wouldn't be standing there with that smug look on your face." A murmur ran through the shop. The customers who had laughed earlier now stared at the floor in shame. "Where is he now?" another SEAL asked. Kyle stammered, "Yeah, I don't know. He just left." The leader exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." He turned to his men. "Spread out. Find him. He deserves better than this." The SEALs filed out, leaving Kyle trembling behind the counter. His chest felt tight. For the first time, he realized just how badly he'd misjudged the quiet old man. At the park bench, a mile away, Jack Reynolds sat on a weathered bench in the town park, feeding crumbs to a flock of pigeons. His hands were steady, his eyes calm, though a heaviness lingered in his chest. He had endured worse insults in his life, but there was something about the way the young clerk had sneered that cut deeper than bullets. He was tired of being invisible, tired of giving everything to a country that seemed to have forgotten. The crunch of boots on gravel drew his attention. He looked up to see a familiar fascia, the bearded SEAL leader striding toward him with his squad trailing behind. "Commander," the man said, snapping a salute. "Good to see you, sir." Jack blinked in surprise, then gave a small smile. "At ease, Mason. What are you doing here?" "Training exercise at the base," Mason replied. "Then we heard you'd been a broken bar mistreated at the gun shop. Thought we'd come pay our respects." Jack chuckled dryly. "Word travels fast." "With you, sir, always." Mason sat beside him. The others formed a loose perimeter, standing respectfully. That shop kid didn't know who he was dealing with. If he did, he'd be on his knees apologizing. Jack waved a hand. "Let it go. I've been called worse. It's just the way the world is now. Old soldiers like me don't mean much anymore." "Not true," Mason said firmly. "Every one of us here carries your lessons, your discipline, your grit. You made us into who we are. You're a legend, Commander." Jack's eyes glistened. For a moment, the weight lifted from his shoulders. "I didn't do it for medals or titles," he murmured. "I did it so you boys would come home alive. That's all I ever wanted." "And you succeeded," Mason said, "many times over." The return to the shop. An hour later, the convoy returned to Granger's gun supply, but this time, Jack Reynolds walked at the front. Mason and the SEAL team flanked him, their presence drawing stares from pedestrians and cars slowing on the street. The bell above the door jingled once more, but this time the shop fell silent. Jack stepped inside, leaning on his cane. He looked around at the stunned faces, then finally at Kyle, who stood pale and stiff behind the counter. "You," Jack said quietly, "you doubted me." Kyle's mouth opened, but no words came. Jack's eyes, though tired, held the sharpness of a man who had stared death in the face and refused to flinch. "Respect isn't about age, or looks, or the weight you carry in your arms. It's about what you've carried in your soul. You saw an old man. You didn't see the sacrifices, the battles, the men buried far from home. You didn't see the years I gave so you could stand here safe and smug." Kyle swallowed hard. "A broken bar I didn't know. That's the problem," Jack said. "Too many don't know, and too many don't care." Mason stepped forward, his voice booming. "This man is a warrior, a brother, a legend. Without him, we wouldn't be here. Show him the respect he's earned, or you'll answer to us." The silence in the room was absolute. Then, slowly, one of the men who had laughed earlier stepped forward and extended his hand. "Sir, a broken bar. I'm sorry." "Thank you, for everything." Jack hesitated, then clasped the man's hand firmly. Others followed. One by one, strangers approached to shake his hand, to nod, to thank him. Kyle stood frozen, shame burning his cheeks. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, sir." Jack studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Just remember, son, don't judge a book by its cover. Some of us still have chapters left to write." With that, he turned and walked out, the SEAL team following close behind. Epilogue. That night, word spread across town of what had happened at Granger's. The story of the old veteran and the SEAL team became legend in its own right. Some said it was a lesson in humility. Others said it was proof that true heroes walk among us, often unnoticed. As for Jack Reynolds, he returned to his quiet life, but every so often, when he walked down Main Street, strangers would nod respectfully, children would wave, and young men would step aside with a murmured "sir." And for the first time in years, the old warrior felt seen, and not as a relic of the past, but as a man who had shaped the future. Because sometimes, it takes a team of SEALs to remind the world that legends don't fade, they endure.